up to 1,000 people from all over the world. But we have him here to focus on the thinking around his work and how that applies to our own context, so we can have this lovely, intimate conversation with him. As I've said, Simon's in New South Wales and is an eminent educational researcher. So Simon, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take us through the next hour and a bit of the morning. Thank you so much.
Well, Annette, thank you so much for starting us off in such a good way. I am thrilled to be here with you all. You know, I have great affinity for Scotland. Evidently, about half of my DNA is from your wonderful part of the world, from my father's side. I will restrain this evening, but you know, typically around this time, I might be enjoying a wee dram or so of Balvenie or another type of single malt. And so I guess I want to say it's great to be here. It's great to join you. And it's great to continue the global collaboration that at the moment we are able to have in ways that, you know, we haven't been able to before. And I think what I'm hoping, as Annette suggested, is we can have a conversation this morning. We can explore what collectively we're starting to learn, suppose about how to navigate uncertainty, how to lead through complexity and uncertainty, but also how we might be able to make the most of the challenges that we are navigating and ensure that the schools that we lead, the teams that we lead, indeed the system that you may lead or play a leadership role in, can engage in a process over the coming months that isn't just organizational recovery, but actually about organizational renewal and learning. So what I'm wondering about is whether perhaps for maybe the first 30 minutes or so, I could kick off with some thinking particularly that is about navigating the unique context that you all as school and system leaders are navigating at the moment, but then potentially open up to a broader discussion. I'm not sure about you, but some people say to me, oh, Simon, it'd be nice just to talk about teaching and learning. I'm kind of getting a bit sick of talking about the COVID stuff. And I think when people say to me that, I don't think they're saying that they don't want to deal with the particular complexities of what they're navigating, but they're also saying, look, it'd be nice to return to the core work of how do we actually change the learning and life trajectories of young people through these institutions and systems we've created called public education. A little bit about me. If you don't know me personally, I've got some dear colleagues, people like Gillian that I've had the fortune of collaborating over the last couple of years with at various international forums. But I'm a former high school science teacher. I dropped out of medical school. My poor mum wasn't very happy. I wanted to be a teacher, not a doctor. I ended up doing a psychology degree, so I'm very much grounded in cognitive science, behavioral science, thinking about how we can apply research to practice. But I taught science. Let me know in the chat bar, please, if there's any other high school educators out there. Just give me a little bit of love here in the chat bar. Let me know you're out there. And after a couple of years in the classroom, I got really interested in how research could inform practice. And that took me in the end to the UK, at that point to England, although I did get to go up to beautiful Scotland a couple of times, including a wedding in September, and the light was long and it was glorious, just past Inverness, and I had the most wonderful time. I did my studies at Oxford and Cambridge, and I was studying international comparative education and PISA and international benchmarking. But, you know, as much as I love policy and system change, I'm actually a big believer that systems don't change, people do. And when you're talking about system change, what you're actually talking about is a system of self-improving schools that are deeply networked together. And so I'm back in Sydney, my home city. My beautiful wife, Alice, is a trained primary school teacher. She's currently taking a bit of the lead with our 6-year-old, 5-year-old and 2-year-old at home. And my real work at the moment is partnering with school leaders to try to give them tools and resources that can support them make progress on the complex human challenges of educational leadership. And I do that through Agile Schools. You can find all links and other things to lots of free resources on my page. It's not a pitch, it's just a, hey, it's there, it's free. You get what you pay for, and it is mostly free, so have a look at that. I do work on teacher professional learning. If we're convinced that one of the most important roles that we have as head teachers, as leaders of teams, is to not just focus on the student learning, it's also the adult learning. I've been developing on the ground with thousands of teachers some approaches to working with teachers to help them engage in evidence-informed teaching based on the research and applied to their context. And so if you're interested in that, again, it's not a pitch, it's all free. Have a look at Teaching Sprints. And I suppose what I do at the moment is I'm the worst academic going around. I'm proud of it. I'm a research fellow at the Gonski Institute of Education at University of New South Wales. I'm fortunate to be there with people like Professor Pasi Salberg, but I basically spend no time at the university. I spend all my time shoulder to shoulder working with groups of schools, trying to solve problems through practical tools and frameworks. And so this year has taken me by such a shock, I got to say. Most of my weeks are normally shoulder to shoulder in schools, working with educators here, and the other set of systems that I mostly work with, funny enough, is in Western Canada and BC and Alberta and Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and a little bit of Ontario, as Annette mentioned before. But it just hit us. And what I want to do is I want to talk about what I've learned teaming and learning alongside the educators that I work with. And I don't have the answers for Scotland. Hey, I'm the first one to say, I've got the strange accent this morning and I don't have your lived experience. What I'm wondering about, though, is whether or not by sharing some things I'm learning, working right now with shoulder to shoulder with thousands of educators here in Australia, that you might take some of those insights and then work out whether or not some of those things apply to your experience in Scotland in navigating this. So let me share some thoughts. And look, I don't know culturally what you're like normally here as a learning community on the chat bar. I would love it if you could just remind me that you were there and that you're conscious and awake. And the best way to do that for me, to be honest, is just to jump into the chat bar to share points of resonance, points of connection, things that I know that are landing for you or maybe are quite different in your context. So obviously, we're in a different hemisphere. Things are a little bit different here. We feel very fortunate to be going into summer, not to rub it in whilst you're going into winter. And therefore, I want to acknowledge that we are in a very different place right now. We are also an island, which sometimes makes us a little bit limited in the inflow of ideas and people. But right now, with closed borders, we have somehow been able to get the virus back under control, and our schools are open and our caseload is pretty low. And I want to say that is a very different scenario, I know, to what you're navigating now in Scotland. But at different times in the year, we have had higher caseloads. We have had our schools closed, particularly in Victoria and the schools I work with there. They've come out of very long and harsh lockdown. And so I want to explore a little bit about how we're thinking about navigating this time. So, you know, I don't know about this, but how you feel about this, but you know, you think about January, February, your plans for this year. There was something beautiful about 2020. I remember something turning up in my my social media feeds. I don't actually follow Oprah, although I'm happy to follow Oprah, but it was about the 2020 vision tour that Oprah was going to go on. I love the 2020 vision. You know, it was about clarity and where we're heading and what you wanted to do with your life. I kind of couldn't help but feel like this year just had so much promise. And, you know, this is probably what it's felt like for you as a team leader, as a head teacher, as a system leader, this sense of we're in free fall. And people are looking at you, but you're not actually sure necessarily what are the next best moves. And so I spent much of the last 5 years talking about how school teams particularly, enabled by a system, but school teams can navigate complex human problems. And so schools and school change has always been complex. I think what's added to that complexity this year is we've moved from just having complexity to now having complexity with this absolute sort of background of uncertainty. And what uncertainty means is that often we can't necessarily know the next best move. That there is a landscape that we've been navigating that I would say, you know, it is much more about complex and chaotic. This framework that was put out in the Harvard Business Review, I think it is useful. The Sinafin framework, I think it's actually a Welsh word originally. But I want you to look at the right here about this leaders framework for decision making. And so you've got obvious decisions, things that are clear, and there's only some things in education that fit into that. Then there's complex things. There's complicated things, sorry. There's complex things and there's chaotic. I want to say that whilst we often have to navigate all four in some way, this year you have spent a vast majority of time in the complex and the chaotic. And so I want to say from the outset, that is utterly exhausting because we're constantly making decisions on incomplete information. And we're having to update our decisions, course correct and adjust on a regular cadence, not because we didn't think it through enough, but because we couldn't possibly have known when we were making those decisions how the next few weeks would turn out. And so I want to suggest that we as educators have been orientating ourselves and trying to navigate a landscape that is complex and uncertain and ambiguous. And that takes a toll over time. We've also been forced, therefore, to adopt some new ways of working, some new routines and habits of the way that we think about educational planning and educational change and resourcing. Hey, to kick us off here and to make sure that I'm not just speaking to an empty landscape out here, and check that my internet is still connected from Sydney through to Edinburgh and Glasgow and Inverness and Aberdeen and all the different wonderful places you're coming in from this morning. Can you just jump into the chat bar and let me know personally, whether at a team level, a school level, or system level, hey, what have you been learning about what's been essential for leading effectively through this period of extreme uncertainty? Let me see what's coming in. Great, thanks people. This is great, thank you. Communications and relationships. Gillian jumping in here, the importance of relationships, connection, compassion, good communication, maintaining connection, communication. Geez, you're very human connected leaders here this morning, team. This is great. And what I want to say, guys, is that, you know, there is a sense right now that there is a lot of disruption. One of the things I learned from Valerie Hannon, a terrific thinker and leader from the Innovation Unit in England, and she caught me by surprise because we were doing some work and she was presenting and she said to me, look, you know, we know that this pandemic disrupts things, but this pandemic also reveals things. I don't want to rub it in about the number of beaches that are close to where I live. This is just near my in-laws' house, about 50 minutes north of me. There's beautiful northern beaches. Let me know in the chat bar if you wanted to organise some educational tourism. I know it feels a little while away, but we'll get this vaccination out, we'll roll it out, we'll bounce back. I know we will. I'm thinking Scotland education funded trip to New South Wales. Who's with me? I might get into trouble about that, but hey, would love to have you here. I think New South Wales and Scotland could learn a lot side by side. Just make sure you come down in your winter, our summer. Why am I showing you this picture? Well, this is a great reef, and when I was a rock platform, sorry, when I was a high school science teacher, I used to take my year 9s down here, or my year 10 class down here, and you'll see there the big rock platform that in the low tide, all the water pulls out. And if you're standing up on high tide and you look down, that's a golf course there for you golfers out there. You can have a little round while we're down there having a look at the beach. But when the water pulls out of that low tide, suddenly you get these new insights of the life that's there, of the things and complexity sitting underneath in that rock platform. But I want to say in some ways, that's what's happened this year through COVID. That when you say things like, hey, Simon, I'm thinking more about relationships. I'm thinking more about how these things sort of play out in our human communities. There's things that I deeply miss about the way we could do education before that I'm longing to have back. There's things that we're starting to realize are truly essential. There's things about equity that we thought we understood, and now we're only just starting to realize that the equity gap is really an equity chasm. Whatever it is, one of the things I want to say in all of this is that we need to ensure we take the moment to allow the crisis to reveal things to us. That yes, there's disruption, and we'll talk about that. Yes, there's new opportunities, but there's also a revealing. There's a revealing about things that we start to more deeply understand. And so I want to say that first, that the compounding factors here of complexity and uncertainty are creating a decision-making and action landscape unlike anything we've seen before in education. Second, I'm suggesting here that one of the most important things to do as we have bandwidth is to actually let the crisis reveal things to us, to help us better and more deeply understand things that are essential and that are important. And the third thing that we're wondering about here in Australia, and that I'm in conversation with colleagues from California through to Alberta and Winnipeg and Manitoba and various places, is the fact that the crisis has revealed, but it's also accelerated some change that we wanted before. And no one would have asked for this, let's be clear. You don't ask for pressure and heat. But the crisis has, in its ferocity and its difficulty to tame, the waves of going to remote learning 1 and then coming back and then into remote learning 2 here in Victoria at least. There is a sense that for us there was pressure and heat, and in that pressure and heat you can forge new ways of working. And it really has been a forging. Some people have told me, look, we've done 10 years of transformation in some areas in 10 weeks. Even think now, there was a time that, Education Scotland might have thought, oh, we want to have some international inputs. We should fly people in for a big conference to bring people together. And yet here I am. I popped home between the end of my workday, fed the kids, tried to help my wife a little bit, get them towards bed. She took off for a run and then popped back here to speak to colleagues and learn from them in Scotland. That there is big shifts in the way that we learn together, but of course, big shifts in all sorts of areas. We went through in our own lives, when you've had forms of lockdown, certain adjustments that might have taken a little while to get used to. Certain adjustments in, this is my family, my kids talking to cousins in different places during periods where we weren't allowed to engage. We used to have a Thursday or Friday night set of activities to try to keep all 14 cousins busy for a while. But there's also sort of new ways of working that have opened up, aren't there, within our teams, within our schools, and within our systems. Systems that, as much as we wanted them to be learning systems, we're starting to feel a little bit too bureaucratic, too structured, too narrow. And so we've started to see new ways of working and thinking open up. I wonder for you what you've noticed about these new ways of thinking, where you've started to see people become more open. Maybe action plans for you have moved from 4-year strategic plans to Kanban action plans with stand-ups, where you're coming around on a regular cadence saying, what do we need to do next and what have we done? Short cycles of work. Because with such uncertainty and complexity, to be honest, long-term planning right now doesn't really help us, does it? We need to be short and iterative and learning and seeking feedback loops. Maybe you've normalized coming together for things like stand-up meetings, something that we teach in our Agile School Leadership program, where we help teams come together. They used to be in person, now more often in Zoom, asking those rapid questions of the last week or the last 2 weeks. What progress have we made? What challenges are we facing? Hey, what are our best next actions? We're spending a lot of time here helping people make decisions with incomplete information and think about their best next moves given where they think they are in the landscape. I think it's been exciting as leadership teams, actually, whilst we would never have asked for this challenge, watching how people are able to step into new ways of thinking and working. And so too have the educators, haven't they? Moving to initial forms of remote and then hybrid, and then managing all they're doing right now in Scotland with students back, but complexities around how to serve their interests best and keep everyone safe. We've seen huge shifts. I wonder whether you can let me know in the chat bar. Maybe you could just let me know with the number. What shifts do you think have been most accelerated? I want to say again, you'd never have asked for the pandemic as a driver for this. But there have been probably some organizational silver linings that you're starting to see open up around potentially digital learning. Is it more about how the adults are able to work together in your setting? What I would call agile ways of working. Have you seen growing differences in the relationships with students around student agency and ownership for their learning, or with families? And given for many that assessment and reporting and qualification systems have been so interrupted, are you seeing a growing openness to rethinking how we think about tracking progress and development? Well, let me give you a moment here to read these and tell me the one or two numbers that stand out most for you. It's a bit hard for me to have slides up and read the chat bar. I'm not as able at using Google Hangouts, I apologize, compared to Zoom. I'm a Zoom pro, but I'm a Google novice here, team. So I'm going back and forth a little bit here. But thanks, lots of people in the ones and the twos. Oh, I think for system leaders in particular, I reckon those agile ways of working, really breaking down some of those bureaucratic frustrations. We've seen new and different things emerge. Well, you know, team, one of the things, therefore, if you're starting to see new things emerge, and let's be clear, we all have in different ways, is to ask as leaders, what is our role in learning our way forward in that work? And so what I've been doing with schools and systems that I work most closely with is trying, and I do say try, I don't have all the answers here, but trying to lead them through a process that would allow them to avoid a tendency to snap back. So what I'm interested in here is if schools and systems have done incredible adaptation, stepped into new, more responsive and flexible ways of working, how are we going to make sure, as we, and God willing, we move hopefully more quickly than otherwise towards a return to something that's closer to schooling as usual, how are we going to make sure as leaders that we lead organizational learning and renewal rather than organizational recovery? And I think given where you are now in Scotland, this is learning that is to put away in your mind, to think about what could I be doing now? I know you're right in the thick of things right now, but I do still think it's worthwhile orientating yourself to where you are in that landscape and considering what it will take to lead organizational renewal rather than allowing for a potential future snapback. And Annette let me know that you had been using one of the simple kind of frameworks I've been sharing with people. And this is a framework that's just about orientating yourself to the type of work that needs to be done at different phases of the crisis. And I think you saw through that crisis phase as head teachers, as team leaders, as system leaders through that particularly late March, April, May. And it seems like right now in Scotland, you are still deep in the adaptation phase. You might have popped up briefly, but there is a sense where you are adapting right now. You are still adjusting and exploring and thinking about next steps. But there will be, and maybe for some of you, you've touched this, and unfortunately it feels like you're back in adaptation, but you've touched what I'm calling that opportunity phase. And I think it's worthwhile as leaders, whether you feel like you're in the opportunity phase now, or whether you feel like it's still pretty thick right now and you're in that adaptation phase and you've got to focus on being resourceful and finding your next best moves. If you are in the adaptation phase, then I would say, look, it's crucial for your own hopefulness and for the hopefulness of your school and your leadership team that they know this is not going to go to waste. This is not like perhaps navigating a different natural disaster. And earlier this year in 2020, you would have seen the headlines of what Australians, and particularly some schools, were navigating around the incredible bushfires that we experienced. And I think the response to that was crisis, response, recovery. Get us back to where we were before. But I think this one is different. I think what we want to do here is not do crisis, adapt, recover, but we need to move into renewal. And we need to consider together what it would look like to be ready to learn our way into a different type of learning future that honors the adaptation and the work that we've done. I wonder whether you could just let me know, even in the chat bar now, hey, which phase would you describe your school community or your part of the system right now? Would you best describe it as a crisis phase, an adaptation phase, or are you on the edge of an opportunity movement? You let me know in the chat bar. Go for it. Thanks, Leslie. Appreciate you kicking us off. Yeah, I like that one, Andy. Adaptation with an eye on opportunity. What a great way of describing the current situation. Adaptation with an eye on opportunity. I'll copyright that to you. I'll always reference you, Andy McLaughlin, but I think that's a great way to think about wherever possible. I think it's the most empowering way to think about where Scotland might be right now. I'm in adaptation, but I've got an eye on the opportunities. So if you're in adaptation, and you've thought about some of the opportunity, I guess what I'm wondering about is what can you meaningfully do now? What can you meaningfully do now to set yourselves up for learning your way into opportunity? And it's not time right now in Scotland to decide on the long-term ramifications of COVID. You're in the thick of it, and you're going into winter. So what do you do? Well, in my mind, as far as this kind of model and thinking goes, I reckon these 3 steps might be a useful, simple heuristic, a little guiding frame to think about the leadership of this work. I'm going to take you through it quickly, and then I'd love Annette and others to get into some dialogue and some wondering. So I'm finding this heuristic of 3 phases really useful. Capture, cleanse, weave. Capture, cleanse, weave. The capture is about, as it's happening, capturing the live adaptations that are occurring. That right now you don't need to make decisive kind of big grand decisions about what all this means. It's too much. But we do, during this period, even during this winter, need to find lean and simple ways to capture the moving innovations and changes that are occurring. Then at some point, I'd suggest we need to move into the cleanse. And the cleanse will be, hopefully, as we move towards spring, as the rollout of the vaccination occurs, as you start to have a much more hopeful sense of where we're heading, it's going to be about ensuring that you don't just have a snapback. And I can tell you, having been in systems that were in total lockdown, innovated like crazy, but then after their caseloads went down, what you saw is mostly a reversion. You wouldn't believe it, but it happened. A total reversion, what I'd call the snapback to default ways of working. And the way that I think we can ensure that we don't just do that is to set ourselves up to have a decision-making process, what I call the cleanse, and then finally the weave. And the weave is into the future, colleagues. For me, the weave is, in reality in Scotland, this is probably April, May, June, and into that beautiful summer ahead, whereby you'll be weaving the through lines of all of the adaptations and the learnings that you've been through, and finding connections back to the improvement trajectories that you were on before. So let me just briefly give you a sense of some of the things you could be thinking about here in the capture. I know a lot of you are doing this great work, and some of these points might be just points of reminder rather than necessarily fresh. For others, these might be empowering to think, I was surviving and adapting right now, and I don't think I can make any big, bold changes for the future, but I think I could at least capture. And that's really my encouragement to you today in the situation that I'm hearing that you're in. Navigate the best you can. but make sure you capture. As you're seeing these different and better things emerging, it's important to try to document some of these things in lean and simple ways. Where are you seeing shifted beliefs and norms, say around collaborative practice? Where are you seeing changed practices and behaviors? Are you seeing the adoption of certain platforms that are working well? Certain processes for meetings, for professional learning, for ways that things are decided? The loosening up, and as a high school educator, the loosening up of structures and timetables could well be a huge liberating force. Maybe roles and responsibilities about leadership becoming more distributed and shared. See, what I want to encourage you, colleagues, today is to say that right now, your only job is to probably capture, your only job in regards to organizational learning and change is to capture what's working, capture the insights. And there's different ways you could do this. Of course, you could do surveys, you could do various ways of capturing, and I know some of you are definitely doing this. One of the things that I've been sharing in different parts of the world is a really simple thing that I run with schools that I have a deep partnership with. And I just call this an innovation jam, and I borrowed that from some work IBM did about 10 years ago or more. And in the innovation jam, I'm just going to drop here in the chat bar just a little link to a Google Doc of a version of this. And I might just show you it. You can have a look, you can copy this, you can move it around. Please don't delete it because other people want to jump in. If you can't do Google, don't worry, and then I'll share a different version later on. We'll make sure you can get a version of it. Oh, and John, of course you can have my slides. No problem, as long as you stick around. If you leave, you can't have them. I will hide the password from you. But yeah, of course you'll have them. Whatever you need, you can have it. So one of the things here is I've found, I don't know about you, but my teachers are sick of surveys. My head teachers are sick of surveys. They're saying, oh, there's so many surveys from the system right now. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging you to think about is to run something a little bit more simple. And one of the things that I'm finding works really well is what I call innovation jam. So you jump in, you can set these categories to whatever you want. I just go through here. So this might be something I'd run with teachers live. I put some elements that I'm interested in. This one's about how they're working together. And then I separate out what they did, observed, experienced, and then what they think they've learned. And I think there's an importance there. So this is like what actually happened, and this is what they think it means. And I set a timer, 15 minutes, and I say, everyone in, I make them all anonymous, and they jump in and they write. Here's the cool thing. Surveys is something that I get a survey, and to be honest, I tag it in my email. I said I should do that later. But at Innovation Jam, you've got people live in there writing, thinking, we've seen this, we've seen that, we've done this, we've done that. If you're in a system leadership role, maybe the teaching and learning ones are less important, but I definitely think these new ways of working and thinking and learning are crucial. You could do this on a regular cadence. You could do this once a month, for example, and find a really easy and simple way to try to capture some of these insights. In some of the systems I've worked with, we've done innovation jams or surveys, even as regularly as every 2 weeks. Don't get me wrong, this cannot be a burden on your people. But actually, sometimes people really appreciate the chance just to pause and capture the incredible new ways of working that they're doing. If they do it live with other people with a timer over 15 minutes, and you can just timestamp that, what'll happen right now is you say, at least I've got the capture. I don't have to worry right now what it means. I'm too tired, to be honest. We've got these signs here that are trying to encourage us not to drive when we're tired. And it says, don't trust your tired self. Hey, Scottish leaders, don't trust your tired self. You don't have to make bold claims for the future of education right now. It'd be cool, though, if you captured insights from teachers, if you captured some insights from students, capturing insights for when you were locked down in schools and remote learning, for whom did that learning work better for? Wasn't that interesting? I know we spent a lot of time, and rightfully so, talking about equity challenges, and we needed to learn that. But it's also worth talking about for whom did this work better for and why? We've got to capture, but we don't have to make all the decisions yet. So have a think about how you might be able to capture some lean and simple evidence. As soon as it feels like a burden, you say, oh, this is not the right model. We want to find simple, lean approaches to capture some insights as we go. And so I've done things like for students, using something like Microsoft Flipgrid. This was coming out of remote learning. I'm totally aware that schools are back in full force and you're navigating this. And so you might want to ask different types of questions, but you need to learn, what are you learning from the work, whether it's students. Every now and again, be careful about this. Don't ever tell parents and caregivers it's a feedback survey, because I'm telling you, you'll get some feedback. Did you read my this, and can you fix this? But asking people questions, and these are sorts of things that we were doing in Victoria after their second period of remote learning. They did about a 10, 12 weeks of remote learning. They came back for a few weeks and then they locked down again. And you would have heard on the news, one of the most aggressive lockdowns in the world. It's worked. They have now no community cases for something like 2 weeks. It's incredible. But we wanted to learn alongside them. You're in a different situation. I understand that. But we still want to learn from teachers. We want to learn from parents. And we want to learn from students. And so then in the future, not now, you just have to capture. I'm just going to keep saying that because I want you to know. So I'm not encouraging you to make bold future decisions. I'm encouraging you to capture, so that there is a time coming when the sunlight is lengthening again, where the vaccination is being provided, where there's a deep sense of hopefulness. And I think at that point, whenever it comes in Scotland, when it comes, we're going to have to lead our teams into that opportunity phase. And when we lead our teams into that opportunity phase, the first thing to do is going to be about sense making and decision making. And that for me is the cleanse. The sense making is going to be pulling together all the different things, the new ideas that emerge, those new ways of working. Now, to be honest, some of those new ways of working, they're only happening because we're in a global pandemic. I remember being in a wedding party, someone asked you to be a best man or a bridesmaid or something like that. And it's amazing how you can move your body and eat better for 2 weeks leading up to that, because you know you're not going to fit into the suit or the dress or whatever someone had bought for you a few months earlier. What am I saying? That there's certain behaviors you can do in the right circumstances. And there's certain things that our educators are doing right now. And they're doing it because it's a crisis. It's a pandemic. But we can't just say we should keep doing that later on, because once the circumstances and context changes, you can't always expect that same behavior. And so we need to do some sense making in the future. We need to ask what's emerged, but importantly, as we're going to stop that snapback, we're going to say, what are we going to make sure we don't let back into our schools? I've had a couple of laughs with people because obviously during COVID, we've often kept a lot more parents away. Right, a lot more parents out of the school in the morning. People saying, "Hey, keep those parents out. Keep those parents out." And so say, "Don't let the parents back in the morning. We've got so much time to do our preparation." But there is a sense here that there's going to be a time for you to capture some of those changes. And when you get them, what I've been doing with people is a really simple process of putting them on simple cards, the kind of cards you might have prepared for a debate or a speech on during school. And we use big cards and small cards about different changes to staff meetings, professional learning, other things. And in that context, we get them all out, and you'll see those dots, a new age voting system, which is just giving people some stickers and allowing them to vote. What are the things that we did, particularly during COVID? What are the things that we want to argue we should take into a new learning future, a new organizational structure or team? And so there needs to be a period at some point that's coming of sorting, voting, and debate. And just to close out this process, and again, I'm saying that this is in the future for you. Be calm. You don't have to do it now. But know that as you lead that opportunity phase, you're basically capturing from the adaptation. You're cleansing. You're going to take your team through a period of decision making, and then the joy of weaving. And the weaving is that you lead schools and organizations often with very long histories and trajectories. And so it's going to be about weaving together the new with the old, the innovations that have come out of that pressure and heat from COVID, those innovations combined with the organizational histories and aspirations of your community. And I think that's where you'll be most likely April and onwards. You know, as you start to find through lines back to your improvement aspirations as a community, as you find ways to sustain new behaviors within your organizational context without the external pressures. And overall, I want to say that without a systematic leading into an opportunity type piece of work, the highest likelihood is that your schools will do crisis, adaptation, and recovery. And to be honest, that's an incredible journey, and people should be celebrated and applauded for seeing their organizations and their communities through it. But I reckon there's a better way to honor what's going on right now and what has been going on over the last 6 to 9 months. And I think that way is actually about leading organizational learning and renewal to make sure that on the other side of this, that we are actually leading more agile, responsive teams and organizations. And we ensure that our systems that are meant to be set up to enable our schools to be self-improving, push off some of the shackles of bureaucracy and find in themselves ways to work in more agile and deeper ways. So, Annette, I'm super keen to hear from colleagues for a chance to see what's landing for people. I'm more than happy to go into some of my other work. I might close out these initial comments, and I'm happy to come back and share some more. Maybe if you're with us and you're there, could you drop into the chat bar? Was there anything today in these overview thoughts that I've shared that you found particularly helpful? Was there anything you just needed to hear today? Do you want to drop that into the chat bar? That might give us a collective sense of where people's thinking's at. And then after that, perhaps then we can move into some debate, some discussion, some dialogue. Again, I'm more than happy to cover some of the more common areas of my work, but I thought tonight, and particularly what you're all navigating, it might be useful to share what schools in my network are doing in thinking about how to lead through this uncertainty.
Thank you, Simon. That's been absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure people will have taken so much from that. I've got a few lovely quotes, apart from Andy's, in Adaptation with an Eye on Opportunities. One of your last things you said, talking about systematic leading into opportunity, is going to stay with me. But I'm going to hand it over to the people on the call and see if they would like to come in and ask you some questions and have a conversation with you, because this is an opportunity not to be missed. So Alison has been monitoring the chat, but I'm seeing John Reed and John Rutter. John particularly liked the work and capture. John Rutter, would you like to come in, please, and have a conversation around that with Simon?
Yeah, I mean, getting your thoughts together at this time, Simon, it's a bit tricky, to be quite honest, because everything is so immediate, and staff are so, I just find they're so tense all the time and worried, and there's a lot of them that different levels of worry. Some are just right on the edge of what's going to happen with COVID, because we've been quite lucky in the Highlands so far, but whether that'll last, and especially after Christmas, is a different matter. So it's very difficult when people are on edge all the time to ask them to do any kind of reflection or looking forward. So something as simple as the capture forms that you sent out, I think is a great way forward, actually, and especially if you do it as a whole school thing at the same time, it could be very cathartic, I think. So thanks very much for that.
I like that language. I think you're right, John. There is a sense, particularly if it happens on a regular cadence, something that people can look forward to monthly or whatever else. I mean, not really look forward to as though it's a treat, but there's a ritual about it, I'd almost say, that during this and what you've described, once a month, we put 15 minutes aside to capture what we're doing. I'm not asking them to necessarily make any decisions about the future or even go too deep right now. As you would know, John, asking people to go too deep and reflective actually can undo them right now. Mm-hmm. They're holding things together. Deep empathy for what you're navigating, and you really are describing the most uncertain times for educational leaders. As you say, it's really hard to even know a month or so away from now where we will be. It is something that I was teaching before COVID, which was about agility as the best response to complexity. And so when we think about leadership agility, it's often, number one, about where we choose to place our focus. And right now we have to constantly ask, what's our next best move given the landscape? I think number two, it's that willingness to accelerate our own learning velocity, that we can't know it all because no one knows how to deal with this, but we have to speed up our own capacity to learn from experience. And then I say the last part of that is iteration. And that is the sense that because there's so much uncertainty and complexity, you can't actually know the answer. And so you have to be much kinder with yourself than you would normally potentially be, because you're making a lot of decisions both with incomplete information and with or the lack of clarity about where things might land up. So that just means that rather than getting the decision right, more importantly is to have routines for being able to check in and then what I call a lot of course correcting, adjusting, course correcting, refining, iterating. And I think that's the type of language, and for you in the school, that I'd be encouraging you to think through, and having a routine, something like a stand-up meeting with your team every couple of days. What have we done? Where are we stuck? What should we do next? Gives a chance to constantly pivot and prioritize and reschedule based on the newest information that you have.
Thanks. Thanks, Simon. John Reed's talking about a great philosophy for moving forward. John, would you like to come into the conversation and raise some of those points with Simon?
Sure. Thanks, Annette, and good morning, Simon. I just think that the whole philosophy that you've described about kind of stepping back and cleansing and harnessing things for moving forward and not moving back to what we used to have is a rare opportunity, I guess, that we've got, which is a bit of a plus that's been created out of the pandemic that we've been through. And I think it's really important to consider what we've actually not missed during lockdown.
Yes.
So, well, we haven't missed that system or that process or, that thing that used to get in the way, that actually we've got a different way of doing things now. So I think that just considering that, what have we not missed during lockdown, has given us a bit of evidence not to return to normal and to kind of harness that and move forward with things that we know actually make a difference for young people and for our staff now. It's not, I mean, obviously we're back at school and we're working with pupils and we're all delighted to be here, but it's not about returning to the normal, I think, if we can do that.
I think it's a really great insight. And what we've learnt here is that because of people's exhaustion, John, what happens is that when they return, they typically more naturally step into their defaults. So if you think about when you're under real cognitive and emotional strain, how do you cook dinner that night? We might say, if I can avoid it, I will. And someone else will. Or maybe if I'm lucky enough to live in a town that, I can get some takeaway or something. But then the next best thing is I'll cook one of my default meals. I don't know. Can you just let me know in the chat bar here? Let me know what's your default meal. The meal you cook on a Wednesday or a Tuesday, isn't it? A Tuesday when you're flat out and you're exhausted. What would it be? And the idea is you can cook. There it is: mac and cheese, pasta, carbonara. You can think about here, keep them coming because we can see which house we'd rather be at tonight. Oh, Fraser, cheese and biscuits. I don't know whether that counts. But we've all got these defaults. And one of the things, John, that I'm saying with deep empathy that I've seen here, because we've been through and then we've seen snapback, is that when people are tired, they tend to their default. So you've all described your default meals you can cook without any cognitive emotional effort. And I'm seeing the same in classrooms. I'm seeing the same in leadership, that when you return and you're exhausted, the best way to navigate that is to go to autopilot, to do the things that you've done for the majority of your career. And so you might say, oh, but it was such a powerful period during the pandemic. particularly around remote learning, and that period of a couple of months we were doing this and we're doing, but it was such a small fragment in the total span of that person's career and the organizational history in which they work. And so I always say, the natural tendency is snap back. That's why we need leadership for renewal. And the question, I'll just put it up here because it's worthwhile everyone having a think and reading it. And we didn't get a chance to do it, but I just want to put this up so you can have a think. John, I'd ask, what would be on your do not let back in list, which is a flip side of your kind of what didn't we miss, right? What didn't we miss? And as you think about it, sometimes people really obsess right now. You read kind of blogs and other people, oh, what's the future of learning going to look like? I'm like, yeah, but rather than talking about what will be there, why don't we talk about what definitely isn't going to be there? Like, let's talk about what we don't want to let back in. I'd love for people to answer that even now into the chat bar. What would be on your do not let back in list as we approach sometime in 2021 a new normal?
Thanks, Simon. That's a great question, and I'm hoping we'll see them coming flooding into the chat bar. But Graham Hutton and Campbell Hornell have both raised that notion of snapback as well. And I wonder if one of them would like to come in and share their thinking with us.
Yeah, good morning, Simon. It's Graham Hutton here from sunny Dundee, where it's always sunny. It's always sunny. Found your talk inspiring this morning. When you get to my great age, you begin to be a bit blasé about things and you get a bit tired. But I really found this really very, very useful about moving forward. And the snapback is the thing that always worries me when you take things forward in Scottish education, because there is a definite default, a traditional default that people resort to and want to go back into their I suppose, their fetal position. So I think I want to prevent that happening and trying to capture what have people found that's been really, really useful for making sure that learning and teaching improves, which has been my bread and butter as I've been a head teacher. What can we do to make sure that both young people and the teachers have learned from this new opportunity rather than crisis, which is what we've been talking about it. And if we are moving forward and we're improving learning and teaching and we're cutting out all the crap that, pardon my French, that we have taken on board, like huge amount of development planning, which actually takes up so much time, and people go, oh God, not more development planning. This is probably a better way to develop planning than what we've normally done. So I would be putting that on one side and saying, let's move forward this by capturing what we've been doing, the positive things we've been doing, and how do we work on that?
Yeah, terrific. And it might be a once in a decade or more opportunity, right? When else do you get this scale of behavior change where you've had exams and other things paused and disrupted? I mean, I can't tell you how many global forums I've been in about rethinking examinations, rethinking qualifications, rethinking. And I thought, well, we couldn't mess with the system. And then the pandemic messed with the system. And then we're asking, okay, is everything still okay? Can we find solutions here? And I think we've created a little bit of wriggle room. The challenge is what you find is that a lot of system leaders will, as soon as the virus comes back under control, which happened here in a few states, some of the system political leaders started saying it's back to business as usual or schooling as usual as a way of saying, I've got this all under control. And that is another pressure here where you'll find sometimes at the political leadership level, it feels politically, salient to actually say, I've got things back to normal, when the educators are thinking, no, we want to honor what we've been by taking us into a new plane of the way that we do our work.
You're absolutely right there, because the examination system has to be radically rehauled, as it were. And certainly now that we're beginning to look at why are we having exams? Why are we having a 19th century assessment procedure of dragging kids into a drafty hall to do a written exam for 2 hours? And particularly those with additional support needs, they need 3.5 hours to sit the same exam, and that's probably the worst thing possible. So I think the change there and the involvement in looking at what are alternative assessment systems that we can put in place to help support young people and actually show what they've achieved rather than just a written exam. that is definitely one thing I'm looking forward to taking forward.
Yeah, good call.
End of rant.
Thanks for the rant, Graham. It was very worth listening to. Campbell, I'm just wondering if you want to come in a bit on head teacher collaboration, and then perhaps Gillian, because you've got a nice comment there that might be worth sharing in terms of head teacher collaboration.
Thank you, Annette. Yeah, I always bow to Graham's wisdom as former president of SLS. So I thought I would let him speak first. But I think one of the learning out of this pandemic and what we're starting to capture is that the decision making is often been most effective and most responsive and had a more positive impact at the local level. And my snapback fear is that we have systems where decisions can be made at local authority or RIC level out of the context of what's happening within schools. The biggest support that I had during the lockdown phase and continuing is my immediate senior team, but also head teacher colleagues who go through similar challenges, have got a credibility because they are making those decisions in the crisis phase, if you like, rather than non-contextualized, well-meaning decision makers telling you what to do across a system. And I think that's a fear for me, that when money comes back into the system, that we will end up appointing a whole load of schools group managers and QIOs that want to put a spin or a decision making on the local context that isn't always right for the local context.
Gillian, would you like to come in and add to that, please? And then perhaps Fiona McAvoy and John Reid would like to come in afterwards.
Thanks, Annette. And it picks up, I can see a lot of the conversations in the chat too that are saying what I'm just about to say. And I guess my question for all of us is how we capture the moment, you know, in terms of that empowerment that people are talking about in the chat, in terms of head teachers collaborating and leading on this. I've had the privilege over the past few weeks to be in a number of conversations with Scotland's head teachers. I'm thinking of the Bosch group. A number of people in the call were in that meeting with Gail and I, some of our programme participants, and head teachers are up for the challenge. They're working flat out. They're managing, as Simon said, really complex situations. So I really like Simon's comment for all of us about not trusting our tired self. Yeah. But head teachers want to seize this moment and make the changes that they want to see. So, you know, the work that we're doing around the Excellence in Headship Stretch programme, bringing head teachers together, sessions like this around the conversation are really, really powerful. How do we move it beyond the conversation? What do we need to do to support head teachers, but also where do we need to get out of the way? You know, I'm conscious that we're a national organisation and we're talking about decisions at local level. So what do we need to do to support the collaboration, the continued conversations, in addition to what we're currently doing? And where do we need to get out your road is really a question, I think, for all of us this morning that I'm thinking about. Andy, I think you're talking about grasping a thistle, and that's a succinct way to put the question that I'm asking. So thanks, Annette. I hope that made sense.
No, that's super. Fiona, would you like to come in? And John Reid, sorry.
Hello, I totally am with the grasp the thistle. I'm also with Lindsay on absolutely confident in what my school needs and what our young people and the families need, and taking that forward. I think it's a really exciting time. I think if we're doing things differently and looking how we're working with our staff, how we're working with our children, we've got the best opportunity to make a difference, to close the gap, whether it's COVID related, whether it's poverty related. I just think this is an amazing opportunity to just be brave, work together and take things forward.
Yeah, it's John Reid here. I love that analogy of jaggy thistle. Such a good Scottish example to use there. I suppose I'd be quite interested to know from Simon, where in your experience, because there's a lot of comments here about empowerment, And I think in Scotland, I don't know if you're aware, I'm sure you are, that we've had this empowerment agenda and head teachers being more empowered to lead learning in their schools and so on. And but much of it has been talk, and obviously it's kind of slid off the agenda, I guess, with what everyone has been dealing with over the last few months. But what I'd be interested to know, Simon, is where in your experience have you seen empowerment at a local level be really effective? What are the features of it that have actually made a real difference and impact for young people and outcomes for them?
Yeah, it's a great question, John. Do you want me to speak about that in the context of COVID or ruling out COVID?
I suppose ruling out COVID.
Yeah. So I know we've got, system, representatives here. I'm always wary if there's a system agenda around empowerment, because it very rarely is the way empowerment that head teachers would describe it. It's kind of, we've had one here in New South Wales, local schools, local decisions. Oh, but only around these things.
Yeah.
So we say local schools, local decisions. Oh, but not about curriculum, but not about staffing, but not about this. But no, you can make these decisions. Guess what? You're in charge of your own infrastructure now, and you've got to, and so there is always this sense where you've always got to ask, is it empowerment to implement your agenda? Or is it empowerment where I have the ability to have freedom around certain areas of curriculum, teaching and learning, assessment, etc. So, I don't have a necessarily strong preference on that. Here's, from a policy perspective, why you see this oscillation. So, places like England, when they were breaking down the LEAs, more so in places like Victoria and New Zealand that I know better, definitely went in the 90s towards local school decision making. I don't actually know the governance structure in Scotland, but every school in New Zealand and in Victoria having some type of governing board and council, and so they have local governance rather than always direction purely from the system. Things like one-line budgets. I know they seem simple, but here's your budget line, and you've got freedom in how you move it, rather than in other systems where it's say, oh, here's this, but you have to spend it on this. Well, that's not a good solution for our context. Can't I utilize that money to be able to pull in an instructional leader or do this? So there's things to do with governance that I think is important for local input and decision making. I think there's things to do with budget and whether you have freedom in how you choose to utilize that. I think there's things to do with staffing, about do I have some freedom to be able to build a culture and a team and to be able to recruit people that are a good fit for my school. And you see differences across those different areas. At the moment, what I'm interested in most systems, and this isn't necessarily a good thing, but the theory that I see in policy work is people saying, I'm tight on the how and loose on the what. That's what they'll say. So they'll say, you have to use these frameworks for improvement. You have to use these tools for planning. But you have freedom about what you choose to work on. And I think that's kind of the scenario we're in right now, whereby actually it's accidentally made a lot of empowered schools feel quite hamstrung, because they're in handing over freedom about what they might work on. They've lost a lot of freedom about process, and that's why it's often felt more bureaucratic in what they're doing. I still think, John, probably New Zealand represents the best as far as empowered local schools. But what they'll tell you is that there's always trade-offs in this. And one of the things when you empower local schools fully or more fully, what you typically find is growing inequity as well, because you get a bit of a Matthew effect. The schools that are often running and doing well capture more and more, both families that are caring more about education, teachers who want to come and carve out their career there. And so there's always this tension between local empowerment and, schools that are more empowered and isolated as individual entities, but then system equity. And so systems that have often done more empowerment often then have to have counter work around stitching what Michael Fulham would call creating systemness to get the schools where there's capacity to work with other schools. Sorry, I've gone on a bit of a policy tangent there, John, but all I would say is that these tensions around empowerment and systemness, these tensions around what you're actually free to do, I'm seeing evident across kind of the English-speaking world.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, John. You got there about half a heartbeat before me. I had written down the very words about features of empowerment. Thanks for that, John. Lindsay McRoberts, would you like to come in and join the conversation? Have we lost Lindsay? Lindsay, you were talking about the confidence, a renewed confidence in this area. Is your mic on?
No, problems with the mic.
No. Okay, sorry, Lindsay. That's grand. But thank you for your comment in the chat. Lindsay was talking about having that sense of renewed confidence in what our school and our young people need, because there's been a real focus on equity and on meeting learners' needs over this period. So that's fabulous. Thanks. Andy McLaughlin, grasping the nettle, the thistle. Sorry, do you want to come in and have a wee chat about that?
I don't mind if you grab a nettle or a thistle, to be honest. I think the end result is the same. I think that the only thing I was going to kind of add to this is that my remit is for across the entire council region. So I am looking at closing the gap there, and it's all about reacting to COVID in a sort of systematic way that we can reduce the gaps that are numerous and try and improve things generally. I think one of the things that Simon spoke about that really resonated with me was this idea of not going back to default positions and looking for those improvements and moving things forward. So I think my big question would be, and I think it's to the wider group, is if I'm working with head teachers from 23 different secondary schools and 30 primary schools, how I can identify what I think are the improvements we need to be working with, but how can I work collaboratively with them if they're all having to work collaboratively with their school sets? So, like, you know, bringing through their staff, their pupils, their parents to get some kind of decision. I'm looking at a tight timeline. I'm thinking, 9 months is going to be the very sort of end result of this. We need to have something on improvement happening. It can't be a long process of getting that feedback back in. So it's maybe about how do we do it quickly so that we can grab that thistle and move things forward and keep things forward rather than allowing those schools to slip backwards.
Yeah.
Is your remit, Andy, particularly around sort of catch up and ensuring, working on issues of disadvantage and supporting students who have lost ground to catch up? What is your remit in that?
Yeah, well, this is one of the joys of the way the funding's been put together for my team, is that it is all of that, but it's also about, and I think that the bigger part for me is if I'm reporting back to the government on how this money's been spent, I want to be able to say that by next summertime, the work that we have done has been valuable and has closed some gaps. And I'm not saying they'll close all gaps, and I'm not saying that we can catch all pupils up. So my thinking at the moment is that one of these kind of system changes is that we're using digital huge amounts. Can we move that digital forward so that all schools have an opportunity? They've all got infrastructure in place, they've all got hardware in place, but more importantly, the teaching staff all have the skill sets in place that at the very least, come next summertime, we don't go back to doing things the old ways, because the resistance to change goes back as well. And we want to kind of go, well, look, at the moment you are working digitally, let's keep on going with that. So that's where my kind of push is at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'd say, overall, you've got to always think through where you're leading from. The legitimate organizational leader is the best person to think holistically about that organizational change. Given that you're working across a larger piece, I always say you've got to pick a very small slice of the problem you want to solve. And so I'd be asking questions, particularly around equity, around what is it that we could do collectively that we can't do individually? Like, it's not your job to avoid the snapback across all areas. And so I would, theorize with head teachers and others, what do we reckon are the highest leverage things that we could work on if we were trying to solve X, So if we were trying to solve for inequity or trying to make a deliberate impact on that, if we were trying to solve for those with lost learning ground, I say that maybe in a narrow sense, but, So for some of these kindergarten kids, our first year of school in Victoria, they're only going to be at school for about 12 weeks rather than 40. That means next year in year one, and when they start, because we're crazy down here, we teach end of January to mid-December. So when they start end of January, that year one cohort is going to have the largest diversity of achievement levels of any year one for decades, right? So, I'm raising this because if I was getting schools to work together, I'd be saying, well, of all the places we could work together, where might we put particular focus? And, I'm not trying to narrow the goals of education here, but, I'm a huge fan of early years literacy. And so you might say, we could collaborate powerfully here around fast formative assessment, approaches to support in accelerated growth in literacy within the classroom. And we could collaborate around that in the sense of it's a tight question, potentially harnessing technology. It's a problem that everyone needs to solve, and it's a problem we could solve more effectively together. And so I'm always asking that, Andy. Like, I lead some work in Victoria for their communities of practice, and this is about networks of schools coming together to solve problems. And we always say they'll never collaborate if they're working on something that they're better off doing on their own. And they'll never collaborate if it's something very generic. But if you can really frame a clear problem statement around something that really matters, things like, remote online assessment, things like catch up and support. We've got work going on here in Australia, in Victoria, New South Wales, on tutoring programs. Look, I don't think this is necessarily perfect. I'll just drop here in one report from a research group here called Grattan about catching up, helping disadvantaged students close the equity gap. But there are things here where people are trying to work out what would we do and how would we solve that. And our governments have put money forward to have this incredible tutoring program. Okay, well, how are we actually going to deploy that? None of the schools really know how are we going to do this effectively. So again, it's something that they could team on. So basically, find something that you can do across the schools, find something that they're going to be better off doing together than alone, connect it to equity and maybe new ways of working and learning and teaching and learning. And don't be scared about making it super narrow, right? Make it really sharp, because then people know what they're working on together.
Simon, thank you so much. I'm just going to ask if anybody has a last conversation starter that they'd like to come in with before we close up. I'm just conscious that people are heading into schools and heading
Totally
into
get it. Yeah.
Just the start of the day. So if anyone has anything else, please unmic now and come in. Sally, did you want to join in at this point?
Is that me, Sally?
Yes.
Talking about the Parliament. Hi, sorry. And I realised reading that back, it wasn't a particularly coherent entry, but not bad for before 9:30. It was just really to sort of flag there's organisations like myself where we typically provide a service to schools to assist them in their teaching on different subject matters. So for myself, we run a service teaching about the Scottish Parliament, but I network with an awful lot of other organisations like Historic Environment Scotland, Dynamic Earth, where schools have typically before either come and visited the institutions or had visits from the institutions. Obviously, at the moment, those services are broadly speaking suspended as people begin to try to work out how to offer that support in a digital way. The feedback that we've had has been a remote lesson being beamed in is not what people find useful. So we've focused on trying to provide resources that teachers can use in the classroom. But I think it's really just a sort of a reminder and a plea that there are organisations like me out there. We'd love to help in the best way possible for teachers to be teaching in the way that we used to. But what you were talking there, Simon, about surveys, trying to find out what is most helpful when teachers are in crisis on a daily basis in their teaching, rather than thinking too far about getting external help. So, oh God, again, I've managed to be completely incoherent and rambling.
No, it totally makes sense. I mean, basically, all of us who provided services for schools initially sat on the sideline and say, "Look, let us know if you need anything. We don't want to, interrupt." And then, it's very hard to know how to re-engage with schools in crisis, right? And they're navigating and they're surviving. And so, how do you produce things, tell them about it, help make their life easier? It's very hard. I think, the only examples I've seen basically are when people like yourselves spend time, if you do have a small cluster of teachers or schools that you can be in a research and development sort of cycle with. So you don't need many, where you're trying to either capture good work that are occurring and then kind of, codify that and send it back out to people. Or if you can somehow get a good read from that smaller group about what they're really doing and what their real needs are. But the other thing, Sally, in your team, what we found is people like us who provided services to schools, we kind of avoided schools and tried not avoided them, we tried to give them a break. But then actually we didn't necessarily as teams build our own skill set as quickly as the teachers in digital delivery and other things, because they were making all their mistakes with kids, but they were doing it in April, May, other things. And then we weren't getting a chance to deliver as much. And so there sometimes in those teams, I don't know at all anything of your team, but there can be actually then a sense of, oh, well, I don't have as much experience in this form of, pedagogical approach as the teachers do, because I did most of my teaching before COVID, and I haven't had a chance to play around with these platforms and find new ways of working. So, just encourage you to keep, if you can get a small connection point, a tethering point of some point to a small cluster of trusted teachers that could give you honest feedback loops about what they really need and what's helpful or not.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. And thank you, Simon. I'm going to wrap us up now because people are heading into classrooms and into schools and into all kinds of ways of working. But just a few roundup things that I think have been really important through some fantastic insights this morning from you and some honestly wonderful professional learning for people to come together and have that conversation starter around the deep and meaningful things that are important in our system at the moment. And so a few things that have come up through the chat repeatedly about what are we not letting back in being very important, how we lead into the opportunities around that power of collaboration and the sense that it can make a real difference. And capture, cleanse and weave have resonated with most people over the period. And people are saying thank you for inspiring them this morning and sending them off on their way. What a great start to the day. And so I'm just going to echo what John and a few others are saying and enjoy your dram tonight once you're finally finished with us. And we hope to see you back again on another occasion. Your work is so powerful in the area of teaching sprints as well. So if we can we have a whole range of work in the new year on curriculum and teaching and pedagogy. So it would be great if you were able to come back at some point and do this again. Fabulous morning. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so kind of you.
Hey, not at all, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in, for the rich discussion.